Welcome back everybody to the next tutorial. So we are going to be painting a Thousand Suns console for you guys today, but we are going to be doing it with some blood effects paint from the Army Painter. So this can obviously be used as a blood effect, but I thought we would try to use it for some crimson armor as well. I was playing around with some models and I thought, hey, this is glossy and red and transparent, so I thought it'd be perfect for Thousand Suns, 30k era Thousand Suns. So let's start with the black primer. I've done a small kit bash on this guy. I've magnetized the backpack as well, just in case I ever want to put a jump pack on him. So we're going to start with Mithril. It's the brightest silver on the Fanatic range. And you can see how bright it is. Now, I'm not going to worry about contrast on this model. You know, I'm not going to worry about rendering the shapes on the red, partly because the light is going to do that for us because it's a transparent paint. So, you know, using the metallics underneath will help to render the different shapes. But also, by the time we put in all the metallics, so you know, the gold metallics and the silver metallics and all the white parts and all the cloth, I think that we just end up with not that much red. That it's not really worth thinking about kind of going, oh, this front of this part is going to be a bright silver and the sides are going to be dark silver, how I would usually render a Space Marine. If we are doing a Dreadnought though, I think that would be different. I think you would need to render the shape, and I think that if you were doing a tank, you would also need to render those shapes. Now, you could do that in multiple ways, going from a dark silver to a light silver, or just having a light silver and then putting greens in the shadow, something like a green ink or a green wash into the shadows through the airbrush might be a way to go about doing that. So we're going to use True Blood, and we're going to use 1 drop of True Blood to 1 drop of thinner. Tends to be the ratio I found works really well, that 1:1. And as you can see, it just goes through the airbrush really, really nicely. But it does take multiple layers, and I would really recommend using a hairdryer in between layers. I would say to get the crimson that we end up with at the end, I would say 4 thin layers in total. I think it's important for you guys to have a reference model so that you don't do anything too. So if you're starting out on a Thousand Suns army, you know, do one model first, you know, buy an extra model, for example, do exactly as I've done here, and then paint it red. And, you know, when you're happy with that red, keep that model to one side, don't do anything to it, and it will be your reference model that you use to make sure that the reds that you have used are always consistent across the army. So, but you might go, okay, well, I'm always going to spray it 4 times in a thin coat, that's fine, but I think in this particular example, having a reference model to hand of the exact colour match that you want to go, unadulterated without having put any varnishes on, I think it will be useful if you're trying to reproduce this scheme en masse. Just because you could see, you know, just with a few dustings of this paint, it was quite weak, a weak colour, and the more we build it up, the more crimson and shiny it becomes. So it's just something to bear in mind if you're looking to a massed army project. And you can see here, because it's a blood effect paint, and essentially blood effect paints have to have some level of gloss to represent the shininess of blood. You can just see how shiny that this is, which is why I just don't think you need to render the shapes with a light silver and a dark silver underneath. Sure, you can do if you want to, but it's not necessary, I think, for infantry models. Things that are on, yeah, Terminators, I think I probably argue that, but Contemptors upwards, anything bigger than a Contemptor, I think you probably would need to render the shapes to add a little bit of interest in there as well. I wouldn't recommend doing this with a brush, a hairy brush. I think that the airbrush is the only way to do this. So we're going to use Mithril Silver here. You might have come across a Instagram post that I did about this model, and actually you can see on this little bit where it's in focus, I do apologise about that, where it's in focus, there are quite a few 3D print lines on this model. Now eventually that they will go because of the levels of varnish that we'll use on this model. However, I'll come back to the head at the end of this video and we'll discuss kind of what I think about just the model just in general. So we're going to gloss varnish the model. That is not necessarily actually, and because it's already shiny, it's already got kind of like a gloss finish to it. But just to protect it, I did gloss varnish the model. And I'm going to use black oils here. Now, red and purples always go really well if you want to use a purple oil wash, But essentially what I'm doing is I'm pin washing very carefully the entire model, and all the rivets, all the sections where dirt and grime might build up, but also around the trim, as you can see here. And what that does is that it starts the process of separating the metallics and the red as well, and that just often looks quite neat. Now, you don't have to do this with oils. I just find that the process is much quicker doing it with oils than, say, doing it with a thin black paint or a thin brown paint. If you're doing heavy metal, for example, you'd probably do this whole process with a thinned brown or black paint, whereas oils are just fine. Speed things up, and the gloss varnish just helps to the capillary action of that oil settle into all the recesses and the gaps. But I would say with red, I really think that you need to be really careful with it, because you just don't want to affect the underlying crimson underneath that red colour. And then you can see here, once the oils are down, and once I've cleaned it up, I didn't need to do too much cleanup because I was trying to be quite precise. I've just given it a final gloss varnish of Army Painter's gloss through the airbrush, and you see me just drying it here. Now, this will maintain the shininess of the model, but the knock-on effect is, because it's shiny, some of the paints that we're going to use are going to find it difficult to get a bite on the model. So some things will require 2 layers. You don't need to use the oil process. That's just what I do and what I'm used to. And actually, I don't think, on reflection, it's necessary for this model. But it does help to kind of pin wash everything. This is death metal, so I've decided to go for greens within the metallics rather than golds that you would typically see that GW would use for these kinds of things. Now, the reason I'm going for greens is because it's a contrasting colour to red. Red and green are contrasting colours. So I'm going to use dark emerald here, and this is basically a green metallic paint. And what you'll see is that I think personally, when you had it in the hand before the metallics went down, that the red wasn't very punchy. But the moment we start to add greens in, a contrasting colour, the red then starts to pop again. So you're using colour theory to make the red pop further. Now, this Tainted Gold, you can all see that they're a greeny metallic essentially. And I'm just doing some kind of final highlights, and each one I would use less and less of the metallic as we go up. Just highlighting more carefully with this colour. But you can see now some of the luster of the red has come back, not because we've done anything to the red particularly, but because we're using a contrasting colour. Then we're going to use dark red tone as a wash. And you might be thinking, why is he doing that? Why is he not using, say, like a brown, which we would typically use on metallic paints? Well, think about it, right? We've got greens, green metallics, and again, going back to that colour wheel, if I wash it in the recesses with reds, which is a contrasting colour, it will help the contrast of the metallics. And I think it's a really cool look as well. You don't see this necessarily very often. Reds, green metallics being washed with reds. And I think that the whole point of these videos, particularly with these new kind of like fanatic series that I'm trying to do, is I'm trying to show you guys new things and things that can be done that you wouldn't usually expect to see. And I think that if we can be inventive in these videos, it will maybe give you an opportunity to be inventive yourself and try some crazy and wild things. But I'm using no more information and knowledge than just a bit of colour theory. So white here. So as I say, this is going over a gloss varnish. Now the white is actually really good from the Fanatic range. So this took 2 thin coats. But you're painting over a gloss varnish. So it's always going to be difficult for the paints to find a little bit of a grip. So I painted loads of sections white. So the front scarab and the wings, all of the leather areas, all the bits in between. But I'm using Grim Black speed paint here, and all the bits that I want black, I'm just using the Grim Black speed paint over. I just find that this is a really nice speed paint to use for black areas. And you can, if you want it darker, just when it's dry, just go over it again, or use it more precisely and just go in with the Grim Black. where you think you want it to be darker, right? So, but a really good paint if you want to do kind of soft armor, the in-between elements of armor quickly, black leather, all those kinds of bits. I won't show you everything on this video today, but most of the key elements I will kind of go through with you. So we're going to use Ashen Stone next. Really great speed paint. I use this a lot for kind of like Terminator Crux Terminatus. So I haven't thinned this. This is just going over the white element. Sorry that it's not in focus there. So just go over the white elements with the Ashen Stone. And you can use this precisely as well, get it into all the gaps and the recesses. Now, on the most basic level, we could just leave that there. If you wanted to do a basic paint job, this doesn't look too shabby. It still reads as white, and has some shading in. But I want it to be quite neat and tidy. So the next bit we're going to mix white with this Ashen Stone. And then we're just going to highlight a little bit further. Again, see here what I'm doing is I've just mixed white with the Ashen Stone on my wet palette, and I'm just doing a little bit of highlighting. And then you can go in with a final dot highlight of white, for example. Okay, so next up we're going to use Tomb King Tan and Boney Spikes. Okay, and then I'm going to use a mix of the two, of these two paints. Now, it's quite, in my painting, I'd often kind of mix the paints together to get a mid-tone. But of course, they've got the triad system, so you could also use it. But I suppose that, again, I'm trying to show you things that are different to what you might have seen with these. So with the tan colour, use this as a base coat for all the parts that are basically kind of like cloth or, alternatively oath papers or whatever. And it will need 2 or 3 thin coats to get a nice smooth layer. Now we're going to use that tan colour mixed with the kind of the spiky bone colour, I think it was called, that mid-tone. And I've tried to put in as much of the footage as I can here. And what I'm doing is I'm highlighting with this mid-tone colour that I've created. And I'm leaving the recesses, the bits where the cloth basically folds, and they've got this sculpt is good actually. It's not very realistic in terms of how parchment kind of or kind of things fold together, but it is good for painting. So basically where you've got kind of like an edge or an angle, you paint the top of that edge and angle, and then just leave that tan colour underneath it. It's probably worth rewinding this and watching it back. I've tried to include as much as possible. Because what we want is some nice sick fades on kind of those parchment areas. Now it's up to you whether you put scroll work kind of on them or kind of like writing on them. You don't have to, but I think it would look pretty cool. And this is another good reason why to leave the backpack off as well, because it's just very hard to get to the rear of the model. So magnetizing just helps, I think. But I'm going in for a second coat now, and just kind of highlighting, just leaving the underside where the angle is in shade, and you can start to see we're starting to get quite a cool fade on this. That just really emphasizes the angle. So again, we're just going in for a second round. So all these paints are quite thin. And they're purposely thin because I've added water to them to make sure that my layers are gradual, so I don't have to do too much glazing afterwards to be able to get them nice and smooth. The thinner the paint, the smoother the layer will become, and we just overlap this. Now we're going to go in with our spiky bone colour, the highlight colour that we had. And again, this you could see on the palette there, it was quite thin. And I'm just bringing that highlight a little bit tighter towards where the kind of the angle is, the fold is on the model. And I'll do this a couple of times, really emphasizing where it is. And you can see just with those 3 colors, you've already got quite a smooth blend. You've got quite cool contrast within those areas that really emphasize the sculpt, which is what I'm aiming to do here. And then you could also afford to do a bit of an edge highlight on these elements as well with this spiky bone color or pure white, which I ended up doing. But what we're going to do is we're going to force the contrast even further in a moment. But don't forget all the kind of his scrolls that are attached to him as well. So we're going to use Dusty Skin, which is the darkest of these colours within the triad. But I'm going to add quite a lot of water to this. Get most of the moisture off my brush. You just see me wiping on my hand there. And then I'm going to glaze this. It's a very, very thin glaze. And I'm just going to push it into the shadows to deepen the shadows even further. And also it helps the blends that I've created with those three previous layers of paints, the three different colours that I put down. So you can see this just forces the kind of transitions even further, adds more contrast, really emphasise the kind of the lines within the sculpts. But I wanted to try and include as much of this footage as possible, because I'm sure some of you guys want to do more than just say paint it, give it a wash, and then give it a bit of a highlight. So Cobalt Metal, so really nice metallic paint. It's got, I'd say it's got blues in, and I think it's really nice. It kind of reflects the sky because it's kind of like a blue steel color. But obviously this is going over over a gloss varnish, so it does need two or three thin coats. It's the only thing I would say about when I was using this paint. I'm going to use some Mithril now, and I do mix it in with the Cobalt. Spend a bit of time on this kind of trident spear thing he's got going on, and we can mix that together to make a further highlight. Mithril mixed with that Cobalt is really nice. And what you can see me doing here is just applying the paint where I think that the shadows and the highlights will be. Well, the highlights will be. I'll talk about the shadows later. But you can see under the lamp where the light is hitting, and that's basically where I want to hit it with my brush. So use your hobby lamp, especially on these metallic surfaces, to work out exactly where the light's hitting, and just paint where the light is telling you to hit, basically. It's hard to often see in photographs and things like that, but it is worth the extra effort, and it looks good in the hand, I think, when you kind of go to this extra effort, rather than just doing like a base silver and then a dry brush. Sometimes going this extra effort on swords and things can make a model look really, really good. So I'm going to have a little bit of matte black now, and I add matte black to the Cobalt, thin it down. You can see the kind of like the wash that I've created. And if I've highlighted with that Cobalt and Mithril mix, now what I'm going to do is into the shadows, into the darkest areas, I'm just going to apply this matte black plus Cobalt mix into the shadows. I can use it as a wash, around. You can see here I'm using it as a wash in particular places. But what this does is it creates some realistic kind of shadows with a matte paint. So it's harder for the light to reflect off it because it's got matte within it, and creates quite a cool effect if you use kind of black or matte paints in the shadows. You could do this with a brown paint as well, would look good. I suppose if you use a brown paint at the bottom here, like I'm doing, you're kind of like reflecting the earth and the ground, whereas the kind of the blue elements are that you can still see are reflecting the sky. I'm doing this multiple times as well. So Caribbean Ocean speed paint, bits that I want to be blue. So these little scarabs on his rosary beads, I guess they're called. And then on the kind of like this electric glow, I painted it with white and then used some Caribbean blue, Caribbean Ocean. And I didn't do anything more than that for the glow. And I did that exactly the same for the eye lenses as well. Now, the head. I filmed basically 30 minutes of footage of painting skin, and I was like, these guys are going to love it. They're going to see how I'm going to paint some skin, and I'm going to use these tones. I'm going to mix these things together to create kind of a skin tone that I really, really like and what I'm aiming for. I need to think about the tanned flesh of the Thousand Suns. It's going to be a little bit darker than what perhaps I'm usually doing because I'm thinking about the inhabitants of Prospero. And then I started painting it, and bear in mind, I do paint with magnifying glasses, so I can see everything really, really well. But basically, there were so many 3D print lines on the head that, by the time I'd got to the end, by the time that I was doing stubble, washes of stubble, the washes were going into the 3D print lines. Like it was obscene. It's not good enough, basically, is what I'd say. And so, I finished it. I looked at it. I was like, I'm really not happy with that. I'm not going to have that on a model. So I went back and redid the actual helmeted head, which is why I've got none of that footage, because I did them separately. So just beware. You might need to sand it down, the head, just a little bit to get rid of those 3D print lines. But I'm super picky when it comes to stuff like that. So yeah, it's up to you whether you use it or not. And here he is. Here's the finished model. So I didn't take you through absolutely everything, but you got the broad brushstrokes here. And hopefully, if you're looking to do Thousand Suns, you are able to do it. And the other thing I would say is that it's a good scheme, this one, because it doesn't require any fancy highlights with an airbrush. It's just literally spray it with silver and then spray it with the red. So if you're not that airbrush confident, then this might be a good series for you. So I hope you enjoyed it, guys. I hope it's been useful. I hope you've enjoyed the weird and wacky things that I've done with this blood effect paint. And if you liked it and you got to the end, don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment as well. Take care, guys, and I shall see you on the next one.